clear all the many buttons. Okay, and meeting's live.
Okay, so good afternoon and welcome everyone to the first full Seattle Planning Commission meeting. I guess it's the first Seattle Planning Commission meeting of 2023. Before we get started, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement on behalf of the Seattle Planning Commission. I'd like to humbly recognize that we are gathered on Indigenous land, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. We acknowledge the role that traditional Western-centric planning practices have played in harming, displacing, and attempting to erase Native communities, and we respect Indigenous rights to sovereignty and self-determination. We commit to being better listeners, learners, and to lifting Indigenous voices. We also commit to identifying racist practices, to practice allyship, and strive to center restorative land stewardship rather than unsustainable and extractive use of the land. So, announcements to members of the public and visitors, welcome. We are happy to make all commission meetings open to the public, but please note that the Planning Commission does not hold public hearings as we are an advisory body. We provide recommendations to elected leaders who in turn make the actual decisions. And we encourage individuals and organizations to provide their comments appropriately to elected officials. So this meeting is a hybrid meeting where some individuals, I believe our staff, are participating remotely while others are participating. No, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Most of the commissioners are actually participating remotely, and I believe the majority of our staff are participating in person in the boards and commissions room at Seattle's City Hall. So next, I would like to ask commissioners to review our revised Color Brave Space norms that are up on the screen, and I'd like to invite a commissioner to choose one to read aloud. Do I have a volunteer? So I guess I'll have to pick someone. Matt, you're kind of right there on my screen.
Yeah. Let's see. I would like to go with Be Kind and Color Brave, explicitly addressed settler colonialism, anti-Blackness, and white supremacy.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So on our agenda today, we have two items, a briefing from the Seattle Department of Transportation on the work of that department and an update from the Office of Planning and Community Development on the industrial and maritime strategy. But before we get to those items and others, as is customary, we need to approve the minutes from our December 8 meeting. So I ask for a motion.
David will so move.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
Matt will second.
Matt, thanks. Are there any changes or amendments to the minutes as drafted? Okay, hearing none, I will call it for a vote. All in favor of approving the December 8 minutes, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? And are there any abstentions? Okay, thanks. We've gotten that taken care of. So, upcoming commission meetings. Our next Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting is next Thursday, January 19th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. And our next full commission meeting is scheduled for Thursday, January 26th from 7:30 to 9 a.m. And these meetings will be held both in person and via MS Teams. And so now I will pass it off to Vanessa for some announcements.
Thank you, Rick. Just a reminder,
to all commissioners on the call, as well as members of the public listening in. This is, as Rick noted, a hybrid meeting. All of our commissioners participating today are doing so via MS Teams. Staff to the commission is here in the Boards and Commissions room of City Hall, Seattle City Hall. During the meeting, there will be opportunities for questions and comments from commissioners. And I'd just like to ask all commissioners to use the chat function in MS Teams to be recognized to speak. And if you can remember to actually put your name in there as well. I know most of your live presenter numbers, but not all. We are working on seeing if we can find a workaround so that you all can be recognized by your real names as opposed to live presenter number 28, as is the case with Michaela. When you do put your name in the chat to be recognized to speak, either with a question or comment, it would be very helpful for Rick and I if you note the nature of your question or comment, and that way we can try and group comments and questions so as to have a more free-flowing conversation as opposed to pinballing around a variety of different topics. I have not received any public comment via email, which we note in our agendas. So unless we are joined by a member of the public who would care to give public comment, we will not have public comment at the end of this meeting. We do welcome public comment, and as a reminder to those who are listening in, we ask that public comment be emailed to me. My email address is noted on our agenda, and I will read any public comment received at the end of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to ask Rick to start the introductions, and then I'll go ahead and call on commissioners by name to introduce themselves, and then we'll conclude with staff.
Sounds great. So I'm going to begin with my name, Rick Moeller. I use he, him pronouns. I live between Wallingford and Green Lake. My day job is I'm an associate professor of architecture at the UW. And icebreaker is I'm going to talk about my first job, which is not really my first job. It was probably my first meaningful job, which was working for my father's company installing industrial heat process equipment in industrial buildings at night when the plants were shut down, with my father's crusty electrician, Donald Blansfield, who explained to me as I was installing wiring in a 220 volt panel, which side was live and which side was not. And it got late and my screwdriver slipped and I hit the live side. It threw me 10 feet back, to which Donald said jokingly, "Gave you a little bite, did it?" But lesson learned, don't mess with electricity.
Thank you, Rick. Michaela, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Michaela Daffern, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill. I work in affordable housing policy and planning. And my first paid job where I paid taxes was I worked at a pro shop at a golf course after school and full-time during the summer.
Thanks, Michaela.
What lessons were learned, Michaela?
Oh, we're supposed to do lessons learned. Oh, I got an appropriate one for being on a recorded call. I learned a lot about sexual harassment, I think, working at a pro shop. That's immediately what came to mind for me. But how to interact customer service. I developed really strong customer service skills working there. Yes.
Thank you, Michaela. Caleb, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. My name is Caleb Tewolde. I work at Rainier Scholars as our leadership development coordinator, and I live in Columbia City. Oh, I forgot, pronouns are he, him. And then my first job, funny enough, was actually at Rainier Scholars when I was in high school, working with our youngest scholars during our summer program. And lesson learned, I would say fifth grade, or they were fifth graders at the time, are faster than you think they are. when we at the end of like the school day, they would have time to play sports and whatnot, or play tag and whatever, and they are quite quick.
Thank you, Caleb. Good to remember. Rose, could you please introduce yourself?
Hey all, Rose Luchila Whitson. My pronouns are she, her. I live up in Licton Springs and I work as a wetland biologist and permitting specialist at Jacobs Engineering. My first job was, I'm not sure how much it related to my current job, but I helped with landscaping at the San Francisco Botanical Gardens as a summer internship. It was a lot of fun. It was a long time ago. I don't really remember lessons learned, so I'm assuming I had a good time.
Thanks, Rose. How about you, Jamie? Jamie, you're on mute if you are talking.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie Strobel. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in the future 130th station area. And I work in climate change and environmental justice. And my first job was a teaching assistant. Well, no, first job was in an attendance office for like 5th and 6th grade because I was on financial aid. And to get financial aid, you were required to work. So that was my very first job. I'm pretty sure I wasn't old enough to actually work yet. But yeah, I learned that the kids that came from a lot of financial privilege didn't have to work, and I did because I was young enough that that's what I paid attention to, is they got to have a longer lunch and I didn't.
Thanks, Jamie. Dalton, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey everyone, Dalton Owens, pronouns he, him. I live in the Ballard neighborhood. Day job, I'm a project engineer for a general contractor, focusing in commercial construction right now. And my first job was at Wheel Fun Rentals. They have one at Alki Beach, but I worked at the one in Tacoma on the Ruston waterfront, and it's those big like novelty bikes that you can rent. They're called Surreys, like 4-person, 6-person. But yeah, it was a really cool first job. I had a good time doing it, working on the water too. But I guess life lesson that I took away was probably, despite the fact that it's a fun activity and you expect everyone to be smiling, people can get really mad about their bikes and like prices being elevated and getting flats and stuff like that. So been yelled at quite a few times. So.
Oh dear. Thanks, Dalton. Matt, could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Matt Hutchins. I use he, him pronouns. I live in West Seattle. I'm an architect. I'm going to combine Michaela's golf experience with Rick's industrial accident experience. My first job was working maintenance at a golf course, and I managed to wreck one of their specialized golf carts. So I learned a lot about how even a small small vehicle can hydroplane if you drive it fast enough across a very slick golf course.
We'll remember that if we ever have to put carpools together, Matt. Thank you.
That's right. Yes, very irresponsible.
David Goldberg, could you please round us off?
Hey, I'm David Goldberg, he, him pronouns. I work for the State Department of Transportation, and I live in the Wallingford Urban Village. My first job was I was 15. I was hired by a guy who was sort of a entrepreneurial sort. He had started up an off-campus bookstore to compete with the campus bookstore, and he also rented apartments and little refrigerators to students and had multiple other businesses. And he had me doing everything nasty you can possibly think of, cleaning out refrigerators that students had left behind months before, and things like that. But he also had me at 15 bartend his wedding. And so I guess the big lesson that I took from that was how to make a screwdriver.
Thank you, David. We'll move on to commission staff now. Robin, could you please introduce yourself?
Sorry, I was just answering a question in the chat. Yes, my name is Robin McGonigal. I live on Vashon Island. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and my first job was mowing hay and baling hay. That wasn't for my dad, so I actually got paid. And I learned that 9 to 5 is not regular business hours when you're doing that type of work. You work until the sun goes down.
Thank you, Robin. How about you, Olivia?
Hi, everyone. Olivia Baker. I use she, her pronouns. I'm staff to the commission. My first job was at a greenhouse and garden center type place. They had their own like produce garden that they cultivated to sell at a farmer's market as well. So I spent a lot of time gardening and pruning tons of weeds for hours and hours out in the sun. And I learned from that job that even though I love to be outside, I don't love being required to be outside all day. So outdoor jobs are not for me.
Thanks, Olivia. How about you, John?
Hi, everyone. I'm John Hoy. I use he, him pronouns. I'm staff to the Planning Commission. The golf stories reminded me that my first job lasted one day. It was, I signed up to be a caddy at the Country Club of Detroit, and I didn't get picked in that first day to be a caddy. And so I learned that I apparently didn't have the patience or the humility to be passed over by all the rich golfers. So I switched and became a day camp counselor there, where one of my campers was Henry Ford III. So I learned to be nice to the Ford family, just in case.
Thanks, John. I'll round us off. I'm Vanessa Murdoch. I use she, her pronouns. I'm staff to the commission. I live just outside of the Greenwood City Urban Village here in Seattle. My first job, which was not paid, was walking in front of a combine on a grain farm and throwing rocks that would catch underneath the wheels into a bucket. And my takeaway from that would be that there's always somebody behind the scenes doing some hard work. So it looks really easy to drive a combine, although it is not easy to drive a combine, but there's always somebody doing something behind the scenes, like picking up rocks or picking up twigs or supporting in another way. So that was my takeaway from that job. Thanks all for participating. I'm going to read
Vanessa?
Deanna's.
Yeah, do you want to read Deanna's?
Sure. I was about to do that. So one of our commissioners is having some audio issues, so she has pasted into the chat her introduction. Her name is Deanna Quintanar. She uses she, her pronouns. She lives in Capitol Hill, and her day job is she is WSP's strategic advisor. Sorry, my strategic solutions leader, where she works on various multimodal transportation and urban design projects. Her first job was a summer job at Six Flags Mexico as a store clerk. Lessons learned, amusement parks do a decent job of creating 15-minute neighborhoods. LOL. So thanks all. Great stories. Great to get to know each other a little bit more. And I'll turn it back to Rick. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes before our next agenda item. And Rick's just going to ask some questions of commissioners who participated in some recent comp plan meetings.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. So thanks to commissioners who were able to attend the One Seattle Plan community engagement meetings over the past 8 weeks. At our December Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting, we heard from commissioners who attended the December 1st and 12th meetings. And today it would be great if we could hear from commissioners who attended the December 8th and January 10th meetings, if anybody has some observations they'd like to share.
I attended the 8th at that was the West Seattle one. and it was a little, maybe a slightly lighter turnout than some of the other ones, at least from what I've heard. But good discussion. Probably 6 tables of 10 people or 8 people apiece. And I would say that overall um, the sense was, at least at my little breakout, was that there was a really strong appetite for going further than Alt 5. The conversation that we had, it was the age group was pretty pretty diverse, and everyone was kind of looking for more.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Some other observations?
I'll chime in. I went to the Meadowbrook session on Tuesday, and it was very well attended. In fact, it was so well attended that they didn't have enough chairs for all the folks, which led to a little waggery on Twitter where they were saying, well, there's a chair shortage, so we should start stacking chairs. The urbanists asked for, and then the anti-housing people chimed in. No, we should stick just with the wingback chairs that have been so comfortable for us all these years. So anyway, that little bit of fun aside, it was very well attended, and it was really gratifying. The people, I sat in one circle for a good while, and then I walked around just to listen. And the fact that people showed up, I guess, was impressive. But that they had so much to say. They had a lot of thoughts about things, and there was a diversity of ages. There were a lot of young people that spoke up pretty passionately about the need for more housing options in the city. But they weren't alone. They were joined by folks from multiple generations. I would say that there was a pretty strong consensus that we need more housing. We need more housing that's approachable for more people and in more places. Where it gets tricky for some people who've lived here for a long time is contemplating the loss of trees, tree canopy, and that seemed to generate a lot of passion. And the sense that what's being built now is being built for a very narrow slice of a socio-demographic slice. That the 3-story townhouses that we're building a lot of are for younger folks who can go up and down stairs and afford to buy them, but we're not seeing the things that other people of various ages thought they needed. So that's some of the stuff that I took away.
Thanks, David. We have a couple more minutes if someone else would like to add something. Caleb?
I'd like to just add on to David's comments. It was, I was also just like surprised by the consensus, like some of the points of consensus between the different generations. I think I came in thinking that some folks would have different opinions than they actually shared. A lot of folks were advocating for more housing and mixed housing in our neighborhoods, and whether that's like the triplexes, duplexes, quads, and townhouses and apartment buildings and condos. And then there were a few older folks that were advocating for different ways or pathways towards ownership for younger folks, because they do realize like people my age and younger are having a harder time buying houses in Seattle, and it's becoming impossible for folks. But finding pathways towards like owning a condo and then being able to build your wealth there and move into a bigger house and upsize, whereas like the older folks were thinking about downsizing and finding places that they can live in that suit their lifestyle. And that means not a townhouse where they'd have to go up and down 3 flights of stairs. And so there was that. And then also the tree canopies was also the other thing that I heard at every group that I walked around in at the Meadowbrook community event.
Thanks, Caleb. Yeah, I had a similar reaction. One thing that really struck me at both the events that I attended, particularly the most recent one at Meadowbrook, was just how different the conversation is now than it was 6 or 7 years ago when we were debating MHA. It's much less divisive. There's much more consensus, and you know, I look forward to the comp plan major update really reflecting that. Okay, has our guest arrived, Vanessa?
I believe our guest has arrived, and I just quickly want to let everybody know that Mark Brasseth has joined us, who is another commissioner. So thank you, Mark. And yes, Director Spots is on the call.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Hey, Greg.
Hello.
I'm very happy to be with you.
Well, we're delighted to have you join us. So just an introduction, Greg Spots, the director of the Seattle Department of Transportation, is joining us to provide an overview of the work of his department. We have 45 minutes for this agenda item, with hopefully about 20 minutes or so for questions and discussion. So before handing it over to Director Spots, let's do a quick round of commissioner introductions. So I'm Rick, Greg, I'm Rick Moeller. I use he, him pronouns. I co-chair the commission with Jamie Strobel.
Jamie?
I was gonna say I can go next. Hi, I'm Jamie Strobel. I use she, her pronouns. I work in climate change and environmental justice and live in the future 130th station area. And super excited to hear from you today. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Jamie. David?
I'm David Goldberg, he, him pronouns. I live in the Wallingford Urban Village, work for the State Department of Transportation, and so happy that you're here to talk to us today.
Thank you. Michaela?
Michaela Daffern, she, her pronouns. I live in Capitol Hill and I work in affordable housing policy and planning.
Thank you. Matt?
Matt Hutchins, he, him pronouns. I'm an architect. We met briefly at the LID I-5 project walk about 6 weeks ago.
Thanks, Matt. Rose?
Hi, Rose Luchelowitz, she, her pronouns. I work for Jacobs Engineering as a wetland biologist and environmental permitting specialist. I live in Licton Springs.
Thank you. Dalton?
Yeah. Hi, Dalton Owens, he, him pronouns. I work for a general contractor as a project engineer focusing in commercial construction.
Thank you, Dalton. Caleb?
Hi, my name is Caleb Tolday, he, him pronouns, and I work at Rainier Scholars as a leadership development coordinator, and I live in Columbia City.
Thank you, Caleb. Mark?
Hi, Mark Brassett. I use he, him pronouns, live in the Maple Leaf neighborhood, and I'm a general contractor building primarily multifamily housing.
Thank you. We're also joined on the call by Diana Quintanar, who uses she, her pronouns. She's a planning commissioner. She lives in Capitol Hill. And for her day job, she is WSP Strategic Solutions Leader, where she works on a variety of multimodal transportation and urban design projects. She's having some audio issues, so I'm reading that on her behalf. And with that, I'll turn it back. Well, I'll say, my name is Vanessa Murdoch. I'm staff to the commission. I use she, her pronouns. John?
Hi there, I'm John Hoy. I use he, him pronouns. I am staff to the Planning Commission also.
Olivia?
Hi, Olivia Baker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also staff to the Planning Commission.
And we'll round it off with Robin.
Robin McGonigal, staff to the commission. I use she, her, they, them pronouns.
Thanks all. And I'll hand it back to Director Spots.
Well, thank you, everybody, and it's really nice to be here. I'd like to consider this part of my listening tour. I was announced as Mayor Harrell's pick for director of SDOT last summer, and in the course of answering written questions from the Seattle City Council Transportation and Public Utilities Commission, I sort of set forth an incoming theory about the job that I shouldn't, parachute into Seattle from Los Angeles and make decisions about transportation before really learning Seattle in detail, learning the neighborhoods, the streets, the communities, the transit system, people. And so I committed to two things for my agenda for the fall. One was to commission a top to bottom review of our Vision Zero safety program because the number of killed and seriously injured in collisions on our streets has been going up rather than down during the pandemic. And I felt that if you have an important initiative, Vision Zero, and the outcome goal is going in the wrong direction, that you need to at least have a hypothesis as to why and identify some things that you should be changing to make the program more effective. So I moved to Seattle from Los Angeles, September 4th. I've been working as a public servant for the city of LA for 14 years. I was the executive officer of the Bureau of Street Services, which is part of the Department of Public Works. So I was the number 2 at that 1,500 person agency with a $250 million budget. And, you know, when I moved here September 4th. I started in the job September 7th. And, you know, usually in your first day of the job, you learn how to log in to the email. And in my first day on the job, I commissioned an internal 90-day self-audit on our traffic safety program. And we're getting ready to release that to the public later this month. But that was the one decision I wanted to make. I felt like I had enough data, knowing that the outcome goal was going in the wrong direction to make that decision. But I wanted most of my other decisions to be deeply informed by the community. In my job interview with Mayor Harrell, I told him that the era of transportation planners drawing lines on a map and then telling the public what they're going to get has to be over. And that I believed in co-creating projects with the community and identifying resources to make co-created investments in our underserved communities, our BIPOC communities. And I told the mayor that, you know, during my time in Los Angeles, during the pandemic, I had identified $50 million in new funding to make infrastructure investments in BIPOC communities, to make those communities more walkable, bikeable, transit friendly, safer, greener, and climate resilient. And I got the job. So I decided to have a listening tour where I would invite Seattleites to take me for a walk, a bike or a transit ride in their neighborhoods. And we opened a web link in August so that small groups of folks could apply to take me out in their community. We really didn't know what kind of appetite there would be for that. It's different. And we had 150 different groups apply. So I've started Monday to Thursday in community every one of my, 120 days on the job. Friday mornings, I get a little break. And it's been really fascinating exploring Seattle's communities with community members. I also moved here without a car. I'm living in South Lake Union and I'm relying on the bus system to get around, supplementing it sometimes with some rideshare. And I felt like, in the beginning, I wanted to be transit dependent and see how the system works, see where it's easy to get to, where it's harder to get to. I'd like to report that I'm actually really delighted by the bus system here. And when you're, along the kind of key north-south corridors, there's a lot of places you can go efficiently. And the buses have been very reliable and the bus driver's very professional. And that's been really a great experience. So, I've been kind of digesting all these experiences, with the community, and also trying to really understand our budget. We have a $700 million budget. It's a very complex budget that includes a multi-year capital program and an annual operating and maintenance program. We have many different funding sources. This year was super challenging, as you all know. As the council was getting ready to amend the mayor's budget proposal, there was a dramatic negative revision to expected revenues, and the economically sensitive revenue sources tend to fund transportation. So we had to put forth a package of proposed cuts in November in response to the revenue revise. And I asked our staff to use a lens that let's offer up cuts that don't reduce service levels of any given program below 2022 levels. And I thought that was a lens to make sure, like, let's see if we can maintain service levels that the public is expecting. Kind of meaning before we do incrementally more of something or something new, let's not cut into our existing things. And those were the cuts that were in fact enacted as the budget was amended. So therefore, although I'm new and I'm full of ideas and excitement, don't have a lot of money to do new stuff in 2023. So I have themed 2023 for SDOT to be delivery, fast and flavorful in concert with our values. What I mean by that is I want to mobilize the whole organization to deliver the projects that are funded and beat or meet our deadlines and make sure we deliver them fully with all of the safety and multimodal and sustainability features. Not just delivering a thin version of the project, but an enriched, holistic version of the project that enhances the urban fabric. I'm very passionate about cities. I'm a lifelong student of cities and how they function. And I'm a big fan of streets for people that create appealing and safe and comfortable places to walk and bike and roll and use transit that are accessible. Streets where we can have outdoor cafes in the street and food trucks and public meeting places. I was very happy that we were able to bring through council recently an ordinance that made permanent our approach to in-street dining that was temporary during the pandemic, and we added food trucks in there to make sure that our micro entrepreneurs also had a chance to do business in the street and get those kind of permits. So I'm really fascinated by ways to animate the streetscape and enliven it and make it rich and meaningful. So that's why I want our delivery to be flavorful, not generic, not empty, not a place to go through instead of a place to go to. And I found a friend in Rico. Rico and I have a lot in common and a lot of passions in common, and also a friend in Maiko, the housing director. And, part of my listening tour was every time we had a mayor's cabinet meeting, I would say, so who's going to take me for a walk and show me your thing? And I've done listening tours with a number of our other division heads and opened a collaborative space with them. And that has resulted in Maiko inviting me to join her in the German Marshall Fund project, where 3 German cities are teaming up with Seattle, Atlanta, and St. Louis to jointly explore affordable housing strategies near transit. And I'm very, very excited to be part of that project team. Each team has a government housing, a housing department person, a transportation department person, and someone from the private or social sector. And I was very honored that Maiko asked me to participate in that. I want you all to know that I'm living in West Coast, cities over the last 25 years. I've come to believe that we need a lot more housing. I was impressed with the fact that Seattle's built more housing per capita in the last 20 years than any other major West Coast city. And probably it wasn't quite enough, which is a real testament to the growth engine that is our industries here. And so I want to be a housing forward transportation practitioner, if that makes sense. And that's one reason why I really wanted to join you today. I want to be a really meaningful partner in your work as you're envisioning a Seattle that has to accommodate more people. And it has to accommodate more people in a way where our per capita carbon emissions are lower than what they are today in many folks' kind of quasi-suburban, car-oriented lifestyle. So I'm just thrilled to be joining the community of Seattleites in general, the community of my 1,300 staff at SDOT, and the community of all of the folks who are involved in our city government. I've been really heartened by the civic engagement of Seattleites. there's a tremendous interest in our work. I'm very active on Twitter. Last month, I had 1.6 million Twitter impressions. That doesn't say a lot about me. It says a lot about Seattleites' interest in engaging with the government on transportation. And I follow a lot of folks who post about housing, and a lot of the transportation folks post about housing and vice versa. So I'm just really excited to get to know each of you. I'd love to take a look at parts of the city with you that you think would be helpful for me to see. I'm also kind of an architecture buff. I grew up in an architecturally significant house in Connecticut that was Sigourney Weaver's house in the movie The Ice Storm. So I have a real passion for building form and the placemaking that buildings can provide. So with that, I'd love to take some questions, and I'm really honored to have this chance to introduce myself.
Well, thanks so much for that introduction, Greg. And I think I hope by the end of this session, you will call the Seattle Planning Commission one of your friends as well. I think you'll find a lot of alignment with what you've just said and positions that we've taken on this issue. So let's use the chat for questions. And while we're waiting for questions in the chat, I guess I'll ask one. I haven't looked at the data recently, but it was a few years ago that I've looked at that, where Seattle actually ranked fairly high among major cities in terms of per capita car ownership. At least at the time, we had a higher per capita car ownership than Los Angeles, which is not really aligned with our reputation. And I was just wondering if, do you have maybe some broad sweeping thoughts, long-term thoughts about how we might change that metric?
Sure. Let me share with you some stats that I was gathering in September when I was joining to get a sense for what's happening here.
I'm sure they are much more current than what I was referring to.
No, you're right about what you said, and some of that has to do with the much higher median income here than Los Angeles. We're right now one of only 2 cities in the U.S. that has like a median income over 100,000 of us. The other is San Francisco Bay Area, San Francisco and San Jose, I think. A very interesting thing about Seattle pre-pandemic is there was a very high percentage of choice riders on the transit system. Folks who could drive to downtown or drive to work, but chose to use the bus instead, and then the link. And one driver of that's an ironic word, is the free Orca cards that come with a lot of large employers. And so Seattle's really an exemplar pre-pandemic of using a free transit offering for your employees to get people to opt into transit. They don't have to pay for parking. They don't put wear and tear on the car. They don't use gas. And that trend has somewhat reversed, which concerns me. In September, the daily headcount in downtown office buildings was only about 40%. And it's even lighter on Mondays and Fridays. However, the number of cars entering and exiting the downtown area was 93% of 2019 levels. So there was a significant mode shift during the pandemic for many reasons. One of them, I guess, not sharing the air with other folks. But it seems like a lot of middle class and affluent Seattleites who used to take the bus are only coming to work 2 or 3 days a week and driving in. And that's kind of a shame from a carbon emissions point of view. It also suggests that the phenomena of induced demand that we usually talk about, like if you add a lane of freeway, you end up getting more discretionary trips. And over time, you don't end up increasing travel speeds, you just end up with more cars on the road. It turns out that phenomena may also work in the pandemic, right? If fewer people are commuting, the commute gets more appealing, and then more people jump on to commute. So we're in an interesting moment where we kind of have to help people get back on the bus. because I really wouldn't want to see Seattle lose that leadership position that we had and worked really hard to create. And as a bus rider myself, I'm very confident that the bus system is an excellent, convenient and appealing system. But a lot of the ways in which we can collaborate together is, are there strategies for the placement of multifamily housing that can cause a reduction in car trips? Not just to commute, but to go to your doctor's appointment, to go pick up the dry cleaning, to drop off the kids at Little League. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could take a cargo bike and take your kid to Little League practice? Like, so many of the things, I'm a parent, my kids are now in college, but we lived in Santa Monica, a very walkable community, and yet a lot of folks' behaviors were kind of quasi-suburban, and like everybody had an SUV and drove the kids to their activities, even though we had a high percentage of walking and biking to school because the school was in a very dense multifamily zone. So I think, it's bigger than housing, right? Our land use pattern can become more compact, where we can offer walking, biking, and transit as meaningful ways to make all different types of trips in your life, rather than jump in the car. And a lot of different things have to work nicely in order to make that work. But I think it also has some very great positive effects, like reducing diabetes, a more active lifestyle. So I think those are really exciting points of collaboration. Maybe that was too expansive of an answer.
No, that was great. That was great. And yeah, it is one of the truly disappointing outcomes, and hopefully we'll be able to reverse it, of the pandemic, is we were on a roll in terms of increasing per capita transit ridership before the pandemic. So need to figure out how to get back there. So in terms of the queue, we have David, then Jamie, and then Michaela.
Yeah, I think you answered about 3 of my questions just in that response to the one question. So, I mean, good on you. You're thinking in an integrated way, which is really wonderful. I don't know if I think you did, because I think you tweeted about it, maybe saw that we released an issue brief a couple months ago that we called Repurposing the Right of Way, which basically took off from the point that at this stage in our development, in our history, we have to set aside the notion that throughput of vehicles is the default setting for all of our streets, and those streets need to do a lot more for us. Public space, greenways, transit, really high quality transit that's convenient, reliable, safe micromobility, safe walking, biking, et cetera, et cetera. You obviously can sing that song better than me. But
I thought you sang it very nicely just now.
But but we're looking at, we wrote that in anticipation of the update of the comprehensive plan, and we're looking at a comprehensive plan that will take into account that downtown maybe is not the orientation, and a lot of people will be working from home, but people will also we need a lot of people who can't currently afford to live here to be able to live here and to live in neighborhoods where they can get to things easily, all the things that you talked about a little earlier. And so the comp plan is talking about a notion of complete neighborhoods, walkable neighborhoods, 15-minute cities, been used in other contexts. But one thing that we've been a little bit concerned about is that the Seattle Transportation Plan, which for the first time, and it's a good notion, will integrate the 4 modal plans. There not being a car plan, which would be the obvious missing 5th one, is happening on its own track, and is happening a little bit ahead of comp plan. So where we've been a little bit confused is, where do the land use and housing ideas you've talked about, where do they intersect with the Seattle Transportation Plan? How can we make sure that these things that they reinforce each other and don't end up on separate tracks from each other? And are you confident that we're progressing in that direction?
I actually am. Rico and I identified that as an extremely important point of collaboration, in September, and we have staff who are attending each other's meetings about this, like some of the public meetings, and coordinating. A very interesting thing that's happening, we haven't yet shared sort of a summary of some of the findings of our comprehensive public outreach around Seattle Transportation Plan, but I'm noticing that in both traditional and non-traditional, inclusive new types of outreach, the folks who are participating on transportation are asking for boldness, are asking for that 15 minutes, are asking to be safe and comfortable walking and biking, and better transit options and places to gather. We are offering like an option of stay the course. That is a very little small minority who's picking that one. I'm hearing from my colleagues in planning that you're seeing something similar in your public outreach. I think we all need to pay attention to the momentum around a modern city that seems to be emerging in both of these planning processes. And I think we all should be on alert for our own biases, being in this game for a long time about what people might think. Because I think Seattleites are showing up in big numbers for abundant housing on streets and villages that are appealing places to walk, bike and play.
Okay, Jamie.
Thanks, Rick, and thank you, Director Spatz, for coming in to chat with us today. I know it's a real pleasure when we get the SDOT director or any of the directors to come in and chat with us one-to-one on like this. So appreciate the time. It sounds like you've really had, and I actually saw the alerts of like, try to find a time to go for a walking tour with you, and saw those come across various listservs. So I really appreciate the time and effort you've put in to really get to know different neighborhoods and meet different community groups. And I'm sure as a part of all that, and given that Maiko is the OH director as well, you're probably aware of everything that's going on in the Chinatown International District. And one of the things that we have as a commission have previously sent letters about is about the Sound Transit new station that would potentially be in the neighborhood. And we've really advocated to say, like, there's a really big opportunity here to build kind of a transit hub for the next 100 years. This is a place where heavy rail intersects with light rail, with express buses, with trolley buses, with the streetcar. It's one of the only places in the city where that happens. And it's also right next to a neighborhood that is predominantly people of color and that has also experienced a lot of past trauma from big infrastructure projects going through that neighborhood. And I know that Sound Transit has not decided on a preferred alignment at this point. And one of those options was the 4th Avenue option, and the viaduct replacement falls under SDOT. And I'm wondering too if there is any conversations that you're having about how to best support the neighborhoods that are around the stations that would potentially go here. And then if there's anything that SDOT can do to really kind of help Sound Transit kind of make the most equitable decision, and to really minimize the disproportionate impact that that's having. And I know that that's just one example, but we are facing a lot of these challenges around inequitable access to transportation, impact of transportation projects all across the city, particularly in low-income communities and communities of color. So just love to hear kind of what your thoughts are on that project, but also in general about how you're thinking about equity in your projects.
Thank you. And I'm very involved in that process with CID and the West Seattle to Ballard extension. We do have some staff who are supporting some of these outreach processes, and I got a chance to hear from them an update on some of how that's going and what they're hearing. And you're right, it's really palpable when you tour the CID, you see where the freeway was placed. When I did a walking tour with stakeholders there, they love the streetcar, but they still remember the dislocation of the streetcar construction. And they feel that they were supposed to get a bunch of customers from the market and from First Avenue, from Pioneer Square, and I'm working on lifting up a new concept to complete the streetcar network called the Cultural Connector, as a way to have a sort of linear retail, restaurant, and entertainment district across all 3 streetcar segments. It was powerful to hear from community members that the streetcar's been in for some time, and yet the feelings, the trauma that you mentioned is right there. I wouldn't even call it under the surface. It's at the surface, and it informs. These various experiences inform how the conversation goes with Sound Transit. It is a highly sensitive moment, and I do think all of us in positions of authority have to be very careful not to once again say, well, the big picture is too important. That's how these things have happened in the past, right? That was the mentality that caused, you know, Black and brown neighborhoods to be bulldozed for the freeways or even to build Dodger Stadium. And so, you know, when I, you know, interviewed with the mayor, I told him that I like to co-create projects with underserved communities. And I think all of us need to work very hard to try to co-create this solution with the CID. In general, you know, I'm very interested in moving resources to our underserved communities. We recently had a delay on one of our 4 bike lane projects in South Seattle, the Beacon Hill project. And it was very powerful seeing this strong negative reaction from the public. And the narrative was, well, SDOT doesn't care about biking in South Seattle. They build beautiful bike facilities, you know, at Lake Union and north of there. And I decided to respond to that by choosing a member of my executive team to be my liaison to the 4 projects, the bike projects in South Seattle, and make them one jumbo portfolio of directors' significance projects. And the woman that I chose to do this for me is a Latina, and I really want her to help me drive these projects forward and have deep and meaningful community outreach communication about the projects, and that one really affects the other. You know, we have to deliver them all in a way that is felt to be caring and urgent. And so that's an example of how I'm trying to reorient our large agency to really deliver excellently in our BIPOC and underserved communities.
Thank you for that. I was also working in the Chinatown International District neighborhood during that that streetcar project, so I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of the sentiments and the impacts. So appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Okay, so Michaela and then Matt.
Hi, Director Spots. My question, David actually asked my question, so I just want to take a moment to sort of underscore a little bit of what he said, so it's more of a comment at this point. I work in affordable housing policy and planning, and I'm very aware of the amount of growth that Seattle's going to have to plan for in the years ahead, and I'm very aware of the amount of growth that needs to be affordable. And I think I share David's sentiment of sort of feeling like when we've had presentations from SDOT in the past on the transportation plan, it felt kind of disconnected from what we know are the hard decisions that Seattle's going to need to make to be ready for that growth. Outcomes were presented in terms of electrification and just didn't really talk enough, in my opinion, about how it can reinforce the growth strategy that Seattle's going to be pushing forward with a comprehensive plan. And I think it's going to require a reimagining of our land use patterns and extremely close coordination between OPCD and SDOT. And we need an SDOT that is oriented towards creating communities for people that then have a transportation network that supports a diverse array of people's needs, and not primarily about how we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by moving people around the city. So I don't serve on the committee that will be getting a presentation, I think, in a week from your group, but I think you're going to continue to get hard and tough questions from us until we see a more coherent strategy between the two plans that are really give us confidence that SDOT's aligning with the growth strategy. And then I just wanted to say, I also don't live with a car, and I'm so excited that somebody who's thinking about how we move people around our region is facing that same similar daily challenge of how you get around. I think it's a really very different way to live in this city, where we can go, how we can get there. It's just different than when you own a car.
Especially
finally,
on a rainy night.
I know, right? Like, I don't even want to take out my garbage tonight, let alone go wait for a bus somewhere. My final comment is that I work for King County, and so I often think regionally. And one of the other things I encourage you to think through when you're thinking about engagement is talking to people who work in the city but don't necessarily live here. A lot of folks have been displaced from the city of Seattle and still come in for their jobs, and that's disproportionately affecting negatively folks who work in low-wage jobs. And thinking through what SDOT's plans are in the long run to ensure that regionally SDOT's serving people's needs, not just residents of Seattle, but people who come into Seattle for recreation or for their jobs. But thank you. We're a tough crowd, but we're so pleased that you came here today, and thank you very much for sharing your vision for an equitable Seattle.
I appreciate your comments, and it was delivered with a smile. It's received with a smile too.
Thanks, Michaela. Matt.
Yes, thanks for coming to talk to us, Director Spots. I wanted to say, as a resident of West Seattle, I am very sensitive, to use your term, to the just general fragility of our specifically car infrastructure, being now, our bridges successively failing. And that makes, my bike ride. I wanted to say thank you very much, first off, for the rapid action on the changes to the the path from West Seattle and through south, because that is otherwise incredibly dangerous. So thank you very much for that. And Michaela took my whole spiel about the SDP sort of focusing on electrification as opposed to mode shift. And I think that we really do need to not only think about that, how mode shift can create better urban spaces, and so I wanted to reiterate that really, I don't think that electrification with just an increased number of cars that we're going to see with the increased population is going to lead to a city that is easier to get around in. And then and as part of just thinking about that, the network of public streets, thinking about them, I guess what I really wanted to ask you is sort of what is your kind of vision for a right of way that isn't dominated by cars?
Well, an example that's I didn't create, but that is very coherent with my vision is our $135 million Rapid Drive G project on Madison. You have a diagonal street that is a unique, uniquely valuable route, and we are putting in the first ever in Seattle center bus boarding version of bus rapid transit, Center Island Bus Rapid Transit. We're replacing a 100-year-old water main, putting in a brand new concrete street. And then every time Madison has this 5-way intersection, we're totally changing the geometry of those intersections to be more pedestrian and bike friendly and safer. Next time you're at 12th Madison, where the SAS school is, Seattle Academy, there's a beautiful new bulb out in front of the school. It's huge. It's like a huge triangular bulb out where like a slip lane used to be. And instead of cars racing around the front door of the school, there's a wonderful sort of concrete plaza for the students to congregate. And there's a really cool bike lane and then a floating bus boarding island heading north. So that kind of project has so many different elements, refreshing our aging infrastructure, creating a more channelized, thoughtful, safe, pleasant, multimodal environment. That really, really excites me. I'm calling that my favorite project of ours right now. And I love the idea of going and getting federal dollars, tens of millions of federal dollars to take, key streets and turn them from large, fast traffic roads to a very modern, pleasant, multimodal experience.
Thank you.
Okay, David, do you have another question or comment?
Maybe
Yeah,
this
and you
can be
sort
the
of-
last one because I think I have something coming up.
Yep,
Okay.
we have a couple more minutes. You sort of touched on what I wanted to ask about in your last remarks, and this sort of foreshadows partly what should be coming, I guess, with the Vision Zero review and the what we do about a legacy of our existing growth strategy, which has been really successful at concentrating housing in our urban villages. Unfortunately, it's all along the busiest arterials, which tend to be where a lot of the collisions happen that seriously injure or kill people. And I haven't really seen a focus of that in the STP conversation, but it seems to me like I'm seeing housing still going in, all along these very busy car-dominated corridors, which are important for people to move around, but they present a real difficulty in terms of making these livable spaces that also work from a transportation standpoint. So I'm just wondering if you have given that any thought yet, or where you think that ought to be addressed and with what sense of urgency.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complex question. A place where I like how it was addressed is like Dexter and Aloha. If you head up Dexter, north of Aloha, kind of parallel to the west edge of Lake Union, you have a complete street. You have one car travel lane in each direction, the bus lane, the bike lane, floating bus boarding islands. And you have all this new dense housing going in. And I like to sometimes walk across town to use that bus stop. Because in the morning, it's really wonderful. Instead of a stream of cars, there's buses, cyclists, and pedestrians. And it appears to be a really wonderful place to live. I didn't end up renting an apartment there, but I really wanted to. I just didn't find the right apartment. But I thought, wow, this is a place, as a guy who used to live in Greenwich Village and loves that sort of more intimate, dense urban environment. I thought, this is really cool placemaking. And if you go back and look at pictures of Dexter not that long ago, it was a very different type of street. So, there are opportunities, to rethink these things. A bus that I really like is called the number 62, and it kind of weaves its way through different urban villages in Wallingford and Fremont, and you end up getting up to Green Lake and then over, I think, to Roosevelt. And it's very interesting, the various different ways those arterials, interact with the mixed use development that's been put in there. And these are really fascinating questions about, how do we do really great placemaking and yet at the same time be able to interconnect these villages in ways that make sense too.
Thanks so much for your thoughtful interaction with us. We really appreciate it.
It's actually a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree with David, and I'll just say that the 62 is one of my rides. Love the 62.
Yes.
So Director Spots, thanks so much for joining us. Hopefully we can continue this conversation, and hopefully you will see us as a resource and one of your friends moving forward.
Wonderful. And anybody who wants to get in touch and take me out to see something in the streetscape or the urban development aspect in the city, I'd love to come out and check it out.
Great. Thank you. So next up, because I think, well, we're 1 minute shy. So Vanessa, have Jim and Jeff, are you with us?
Jim is with us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start with the intros then. Jeff Wetland and Jim Holmes from the Office of Planning and Community Development have joined us to provide an update on the industrial and maritime strategy. We have an hour for this agenda item with hopefully 25 to 30 minutes for questions and discussion. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Jim Holmes with OPCD. Jeff won't be joining us today. He has a conflict. Thanks for the opportunity to brief the Commission again on the industrial maritime strategy. We are really in the home stretch of making some things that we've been working on for a few years now actually happen. We're very excited about that. So I'm going to recap what we've done, how we got here, and what the next steps are, and be happy to take any questions. So this presentation goes a little more into the weeds than we usually do in our presentations, but I think you guys have seen enough of this material that'll be useful. And I'm happy to unpack any of it as we go through it. So next slide. All right, so key features of this proposal. And this all comes from the Industrial Maritime Stakeholder Group that was convened in 2017 to strengthen land use protections for core industrial areas. That means 85% of our industrial land will be in our core maritime manufacturing and logistics zone. We will propose comprehensive plan policies, which I'll talk about later, that will limit removal of land from the manufacturing industrial centers. And finally, close some zoning loopholes, very technical corrections that have allowed for incompatible uses to be developed in our core industrial areas. We have addressed the fact that we are going to have transit stations in our industrial areas in the future, and have worked really hard to thread that needle between a strong industrial area, but leveraging those investments with an employment dense TOD program around those stations. We'll also be adding capacity for about 3,000 new dwelling units. About half of them are about outside of our manufacturing industrial centers. So it's industrial land currently outside of our mix, close to Judkins Park, in Ballard and in Georgetown, that we will be changing to a neighborhood commercial zone that would allow housing. And about half will be in our industrial areas, which as the result of an expansion of our caretakers artist studio provisions to include workforce housing as a conditional use, and we'll talk about that. And finally, working to address livability and environmental justice in the edge neighborhoods, particularly in South Park and Georgetown. Next slide. So just basis and the purpose of why we're doing this work, we want to protect and grow the 95,000 workforce jobs that Seattle has in its industrial lands. 2/3 are accessible without a 4-year degree. Many are unionized with quality benefits with starting salaries that exceed $70,000 a year in key fields. We want to support those economic sectors that historically have been insulated from major ups and downs in the economy. Even through the pandemic, the maritime industrial sectors kept moving along despite supply chain issues. We want to leverage historic investments in infrastructure of regional and statewide significance like rail and freight corridors and deep water ports. And this whole proposal is building on the May 2021 consensus of the Stakeholder Advisory Council that they released in 2021. Next slide. So the study area is, you see the purple in Ballard, Goldenrod in Bidmick, Inner Bay, and then you see the Duwamish-Mick. That's all in manufacturing industrial centers, and that's been really the focus of this effort. I mentioned the areas outside of our mix, so you can see over by Judkins Park. There's a little bit of pink you can kind of see by I-90 along the north shore of Lake Union and Fremont, and then on the southeast shoreline, a very small sliver of industrial zoning that is outside the mix. And so that was the focus of our study. Next slide. So just in addition to the 2-year stakeholder process, we have completed the EIS process, started in the summer of 2021. We released our final EIS in September of 2022, and we received no appeals. That's allowed us to move forward with implementation. And we will have proposed legislation to City Council late winter 2023. Next slide. So we've talked about this before. We are proposing 3 new industrial zones: maritime, manufacturing and logistics, industry and innovation, and urban industrial. Next slide. So the maritime manufacturing and logistics, I'll probably say MML going forward, is our core industrial zone. It's for those legacy industrial areas adjacent to the port, using the rail facilities, close to freight corridors. These are the areas that are vital, active industrial areas. We want to protect them. We want to provide land use predictability to the companies that are there, so they will continue to invest and, if appropriate, expand in Seattle. And so we want to maintain these areas. Next slide. The Industry and Innovation Zone, that's our approach to TOD around our transit stations. We envision it being within 1/4 to 1/2 mile of transit stations. It's a model where you will see in the gray area, these structures have industrial uses, and then there's an incentive system, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but for every square foot of industrial, you can build a certain amount of non-industrial commercial floor area above it. And the idea is to really get some employment density. We envision these areas to be compact, walkable areas with strong travel demand management programs, like parking maximums, and I think Director Spots talked about the Orchid cards before, and streetscapes that support more pedestrian movement through the area. Next slide. Finally, the urban industrial zone, that will be, for the most part, replacing our current industrial buffer zone, and that's that transitional zone between our industrial areas and our non-industrial areas. And these are areas increasingly that we're seeing the kinds of uses that actually draw in customers. They have a more public-facing role. So I'm thinking like the brewery district in Ballard is a really great example, where they have the tap rooms in addition to their industrial function of making beer for sales offsite. So we envision this area as slightly more fine-grained. We want to work with SDOT in developing a street topology that promotes safe movement of freight and pedestrians, because both modes are occurring in these neighborhoods. And it's in this zone where we would be allowing this workforce housing by conditional use. So you kind of see this one structure with the gray floors below, and above it, that's supposed to be residential development. And I'll talk about the specifics of that in a few slides. Next slide. So this is a map of our preferred alternative map, basically, which is going to be what we propose to council in March. You see the darker blue area, that's the core industrial zone, makes up the majority of our industrial area. The purple areas are that new TOD approach. You see that around, for example, the T's mark existing or expected transit stations, and I realize decisions have not been made, but based on the alternative Sound Transit that's put out, we feel comfortable with these zoning patterns. So you see the T in the Soto station. You see a T kind of in the Smith Cove station, and I know they're looking at other alternatives too, but it's a good opportunity to point out that that area is currently zoned industrial commercial, and so this zone is being used either in proximity to transit stations or where it's currently zoned industrial commercial. So that's a little departure from the locational criteria. The goldenrod color you see, that's the urban industrial transition zone. You see it all around Georgetown, for example, where we've expanded that it's beyond what was the industrial buffer footprint. You see that in South Park, separating the core industrial area from the core South Park neighborhood. And you see it up at the northeast edge of Ballard as well, and on the north shore of Lake Union. So the new mixed use zones, and I'm just realizing you can't see my arrows. I'm moving it around, can you? Okay. The new mixed use zones are areas that are either outside of the mix, so Judkins Park, thank you. And in Georgetown, we're actually proposing to remove land from the manufacturing industrial center to advance some neighborhood goals there, as well as in South Park. There's 2 tiny nodes that connect it better to the shoreline than the current zoning pattern does. And finally, outside of the mix, we are retaining the current industrial commercial zone. So you see that in Fremont, for example. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the key features of the preferred alternative, which is the basis for our proposal. We've responded to draft EIS comments. We will employ unique development standards for the area we're taking out of the MIC in Georgetown to make it compatible with the existing commercial development, but also to preserve some of the historic structures. There's more housing outside of the mix. We've expanded the range of mitigation measures and in the EIS that could be applied to projects as this is implemented. We've increased the incentives for the TOD investment in the industry and innovation zones. That was direct feedback we got from developers who were working with us on feasibility. We will have some improvements to the stadium district to support the stadium district goals. And I talked about the limited industry supportive housing. It's less than we did in our maximum alternative, but it's still a significant number. And more new housing outside manufacturing industrial centers. Next slide. So growth estimates by the EIS alternatives. So the preferred alternative, what we are proposing is an estimated 141,000 population. Jobs are slightly less than that. I'm sorry, this slide does not make sense. It would be a total 141,000 jobs in the preferred alternative by the year 2044. That's less than our alternative 4 that had 165, less than alternative 3, a little more than alternative 2. Next slide. You know, the employment analysis, we anticipate we need to maintain a certain proportion of employment in our industrial sectors to maintain our manufacturing industrial center designation. It has to be over 50%. Currently, or in 2018, that number of industrial jobs was 55%. With what we're proposing, the year 2044, it will be 53%. Next slide. So this is an example of the kind of development we anticipate in the industry and innovation zone. I do wish in this rendering we had someone with a hard hat and a black lunchbox, but that would be that industrial-like use at the lower floors, and above them you would have the commercial uses. Next slide. So this is the area around the Soto station and the stadium district that we are proposing these new zones in, and you see it's really, we've gone much broader than we did in previous alternatives in distance from the Soto station, and we extended that down to Starbucks Center and vicinity, still within that half-mile distance of the transit station. We are placing the stadium district and the area between Holgate and I can't think of the name of the street, but the Starbucks Center, basically with the urban industrial zone. Next slide.
Lander?
It's before Lander. I think it's Stacy.
Yeah.
So let's delve into a little bit of the weeds on this industry and innovation zone. So the bonus development structure has 2 tiers. In tier 1, the first 0.5 FAR must be an industrial use and be bona fide light industrial space. In the legislation we are drafting, we are specifically identifying which uses in the land permitted use table qualify as industrial uses, and we are including standards to ensure that the space that's developed for industrial use could actually be used for industrial purposes. After that 0.5 FAR is achieved, the development could contain 5 square feet of bonus development for each square foot of industrial space, up to a maximum FAR of 6. And I should say that that bonus space is non-residential space. In Tier 2, there's an additional 0.5 FAR that a project could qualify for. It's kind of another pool of incentives. If the project's mass timber, if there is a TDR for transfer development rights to finance unreinforced masonry retrofitting of an offsite building. Those are a couple of the last increment tiers. Those were suggested to us directly by the development community, something that might help the project's work. We have some FAR exemptions too. Workforce development training could go into qualifies as an industrial space, but it's also not chargeable FAR in childcare facilities as well. And finally, there is an offsite performance option to build the industrial space that allows the commercial space elsewhere within the same mix. So it's possible someone would develop a building by the SDOT station that doesn't include industrial space, but they will have developed the required industrial space somewhere else in the vicinity. And the height limit there in SDOT is 160 feet. Next slide. So some of the changes in the stadium district, we would amend the stadium district overlay zone to allow lodging outright, increase the maximum FAR from 3.25 to 4.5, slightly increase the size of use limits for restaurants, retail, and office. The size of use limit will be waived if there is 0.4 FAR of industrial space provided in the project. We are increasing the height limit to 85 feet. The area is a mix of 85 and 65 feet today. We are removing the requirement for design review in this area. And it may allow up to about 650 dwelling units in the stadium area. That's a max of 50 dwelling units per acre. And it could be workers' quarters and live-work studios, and workforce housing must be affordable at 90% of the area median income. There's some other locational requirements, like must be 500 feet from a shoreline, for example. In the stadium district, we wouldn't require the housing to be as far from a freight corridor as we would require it elsewhere, because it would be almost impossible to do. Next slide. In Georgetown, as I talked about, we're taking that red area out of the manufacturing industrial center and recommending it be rezoned to neighborhood commercial. We will tailor the development standards, working with the community over the next year. The goldenrod color is that urban industrial. We've also expanded it to kind of reach west towards 4th Avenue. And many of you may know this, but there's a Georgetown Development Corporation, I think they're called. They're proposing a workforce housing project on that area that has no industrial zoning because it's commercial zoning. So this would be complementary to that. Next slide. So comprehensive plan policies, I want to touch on these. I will be sending Planning Commission staff the full text of the policies so that the Commission can review them. But we will, and those policies consist of a set of new policies that establish the new land use framework for industrial areas. So basically we're saying these are the zones we will use in our industrial areas, and these are the locational criteria. a new policy that limits changes to manufacturing industrial center boundaries to major updates of the comprehensive plan or following a city-led study of the city's industrial lands in their entirety, like this one. The goal here is to remove changes to industrial land from the annual amendment process. This is about ensuring predictability of future land use I talked about earlier. It doesn't mean it can never change, but it has to be looked at as a whole. So, when we started this project, we were having discussions about the future of the armory, and they were different than discussions about the future of the stadium district. And they were different, there were just like 4 or 5 different land use discussions about land in the mix, and we want to link any removal of land from the manufacturing industrial centers to one discussion and evaluation of the whole area. And we are also proposing a new policy that establishes the city's intent to work with the owners, currently the state of Washington, but that could change, on a master planning process for any future redevelopment of the Wasca and Inter Bay Armory sites. We're just setting a marker that the city is very interested in what happens in those places, and we intend to be part of the planning for them. Next slide. So this is a timeline of next steps. We published the environmental impact statement on the 29th. In the spring, late winter, we will have we'll transmit comprehensive plan policy text amendments to City Council. The first phase of proposed zoning code changes to City Council, and we will begin the update of the center's plans for the Duwamish-Schmick and the Binmick. And in next spring, the spring of 2024, we will complete the center's plan and transmit final zoning changes to council. And you might notice the 2 phases of zoning code changes. So there are some area specific things, like I mentioned, development standards in Georgetown we want to work with the community on that will take some time, and so that will occur over that next year. As we develop the center's plans, there may be some fine tuning of the zoning that comes out of that. We're reserving the ability to do that. And finally, anytime we introduce a broad new set of development regulations into the zoning code, we very quickly find out within a short time areas that maybe they could be improved upon for implementation purposes. And so that gives us an opportunity to do that. So that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Jim. Again, if everyone would please use the chat to establish a queue for questions. And I guess while I'm waiting for some questions to show up in the chat, I just had a couple. I remember, years ago, when we allowed artist housing in industrial zones, there would be a determinant. You had to establish that it was a bona fide artist first, and then second, there was a requirement to basically sign a waiver, basically agree that you would not complain about industrial activities that were taking place. And so I guess my 2 questions are, one is, what would be the definition of bona fide industrial use? And second, will there be a similar requirement that someone living in this accessory housing related within these industrial zones would have to sign some kind of agreement that they would not complain about industrial activity?
Yes to both. We will be requiring that agreement as one of the conditions in the conditional use process that would allow the workforce housing. We are putting in development standards. We're working with the building department now to define those. Bona fide industrial space, can it be served with adequate electric supply for industrial activity? Is there an adequate freight elevator for industrial activity? Are there adequate loading bays for shipping and receiving? Are the spans, clearance spans? So it's a number of performance criteria like that. We still, obviously that could still. So we have the shell and it's built for industrial use. We will still be needing to enforce it, but we are trying to avoid the condition where someone says, oh, sure, we'll build industrial space, and it's not. So we want to put in those development performance standards.
Right. And I would assume that if one goes through the the time and expense of including all of that, it's highly unlikely that they wouldn't use it for that purpose. At least one would hope.
That is our hope. I mean, we kind of view this as an opportunity. I mean, nice modern industrial space, cross-subsidized probably by the more profitable commercial above it. This is the model we're looking for.
Yep. Thanks.
Yep.
Michaela.
Yeah, so this seems really different than the last briefing that I received, which is probably when you're in the DEIS phase, and we were briefed on kind of the recommendations that came out of the advisory council process. And it seems to diverge quite a bit from the comment letter I think we labored over through several meetings. And so I guess I'm just for my fellow commissioners, I'm pretty surprised by the amount of housing, kind of the shift away, that a lot of the changes things that seem new to me don't seem to be advancing equity. They seem to they seem to also be degrading the industrial intent of our industrial lands. So I'm a little surprised. There clearly was some politics probably at play, or I just wasn't paying close enough attention when we were working on our comment letter. But I don't know if I really like the result. And I'm curious, as a citizen, like what are our opportunities to engage in what's ahead? The EIS is done. It kind of seems like our opportunity to influence this has passed. Is that correct, Jim?
Well, we're moving into a different stage. I mean, obviously the commission can comment how they want to comment, but we're moving into the legislative phase where there's a council process that is influenced by people talking to council members and attending the public hearing and making their views known through that forum. But yes, we are developing the proposal. We feel that we have gone through quite a bit, and I do want to say that on the degrading the industrial lands, and maybe I'm reacting to the wrong issue. If it's about housing, it wasn't about housing.
Okay. It's about housing, but it's also about like what's happening in the stadium district, and all of that just seems different than the proposals I remember seeing before.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I will say, as far as housing, this actually is a reduction in the amount of housing than of the four alternatives than the two most extreme alternatives. It's not as much as either of those, which is a response to the number of comments we received. We probably have talked more about maker spaces in the past, and that was just a choice of words I didn't use today. That part of it hasn't changed. We anticipate the urban industrial in particular zone, that goldenrod zone that showed on the maps, being a good home for makers. And when I was talking about the whole idea of people coming into the neighborhood for the public facing piece of it, I actually was thinking about makers that often are selling stuff out of their space on site.
Okay, and is this outcome fairly consistent with what the advisory council put forward as a recommendation?
I believe so.
Okay. It must just be my perception or my misinterpretation of what I thought was coming out of this process. Yeah. I'm taking the blame for being so surprised. You don't need to respond, Jen.
No. I'm just saying I've been so close to this for so long. It may have shifted over the time. I don't remember which specific presentation you're remembering, but yeah.
Vanessa?
Thank you, Rick. Two comments. One specifically in relationship to, in response to your comment, Michaela. John and I will pull up the February 2022 Planning Commission DEIS comment letter and compare it to this presentation. Personally, I don't feel like what Jim has presented today is vastly different from what the commission saw and commented on in February. We did also, the Land Use and Transportation Committee did also get an update from Jim and Jeff Wentland at the October Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting. So John and I will do a little crosswalk between that comment letter and this. And then I also just wanted to add that in the commission's role as stewards of the comp plan, we will be reviewing the proposal that the mayor will transmit to council that appears on the screen right now, transmit comprehensive policy text amendments to city council. You all will look at a draft staff letter, comment on that letter at the next planning commission meeting, and we will seek to approve a letter for the consideration of city council regarding the comp plan policy text amendments, as well as proposed zoning code changes at the end of March, in time for council to have those recommendations on hand as the land use committee of city council reviews these proposals.
Vanessa, I think it'd be really helpful to see that crosswalk with the February presentation as well in our letter.
Are there other questions? Mark.
Thank you. I guess just quickly, so you noted having there being less housing and just not having everything fully in front. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about that? I mean, is it just reduce the locations that were initially proposed for the kind of maker spaces, or I guess maybe just talk about where the less housing is occurring.
So within the industrial areas, we reduced the amount of housing by about half. And there is where there is more housing than I think we've come to this group in the past is those areas outside of our manufacturing industrial centers that we are changing to neighborhood commercial. Particularly that area that's right by Judkins Park on Rainier Avenue. There's a mix of warehousing type uses. Right where I-90 curves. There's that pink area there. The other areas you can't see it on this map because it's very fine grained, but on the north side of Market Street, across from the Nordic Museum in that area, that's currently in an industrial zone that we are proposing to change to neighborhood commercial. So over half the housing, the 3,000 units, we estimate, and in Georgetown, where the area we're taking out of the MIC, we estimate would occur in those places. The other 1,500 is based on the acreage we have in that urban industrial zone and looking at 50 dwelling units per acre. And we don't expect to see, it would take a fair amount of effort to create a housing project at that density. There's some major phase development provisions that would allow someone to do that, but you wouldn't see these places become neighborhood areas, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
Residential neighborhoods is what I meant to say.
Matt.
Yeah, could you pop back to the slide that was specific to SOTO, the stadium district?
The map or the provision?
The one that talks about the provisions. I just
sure. This one?
Yeah, I guess this caught me a little bit off guard. The ability to kind of transfer the development rights if you build the industrial elsewhere. it just feels like we're going to end up with an FAR of, like really big non-industrial buildings all around the stadium district. You know, an FAR of 6.0 or 6.5 is a pretty big building, and if only, you know, the first, well, I guess, what is it, the
First
I
floor.
guess yeah, like half of the first floor, or
So can we go back to the map first, the slide right before this, I think?
yeah.
So the area in purple, that's what we're talking about for industry and innovation. So you see the T marks the transit station. It would not be in the goldenrod area. It would just be in these areas. And the intent was to get that employment. I mean, we kind of have that at Starbucks, but the intent was to get employment density at the transit station without incompatible residential development. But I'm open to hearing if you think this is too much. This is the half, this, you know, it's not a perfect half mile, obviously.
No, it's just, it feels like, and similar to Michaela's point, that the uses that are going to go in there are going to, you know, the, you know, land costs uses are going to be very different than other mix, I would think, because of the, I mean, and maybe that's the intent, because it is around the transit station, but it just seems like it's going to be a very different animal. You know, if we look at that one slide that has, you know, 7 stories of commercial on top of a, you know, a thin layer of industrial, it almost feels like we're you're giving the opportunity to even trade that first level of industrial away to a different site. Is that, am I just am I misinterpreting this?
Yeah, you can build that industrial anywhere in that blue area, anywhere in the goldenrod area, anywhere in the purple area. Actually, you don't have to build the 7-story structure. So this represents an effort to really thread a needle. We have transit stations. There was significant pressure. I mean, we've had discussions with the commission, in fact, about the need to allow housing around these stations. But on the stakeholder groups, we heard that too. But we also heard from others, no, not whatsoever. We're trying to respond to the fact that this is a changed circumstance with the, you know, the second Sound Transit line coming through here. It's not a traditional industrial area as that occurs. So this is a proposal that we developed, but we're open to feedback.
Yeah, just, I guess that it's the scale of it is just much bigger than I was thinking for whatever reason.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? We still have a few minutes left.
I think I'm still kind of sitting with this and processing it, because I'm having similar reactions, I think, to other folks of concerns about when we put housing, and we've talked about this before, when we put housing in industrial areas, the scope of you know, what are we potentially giving up in terms of industrial lands, of certain types of uses, and if, you know, it's very hard to transition things back once something is converted. And so being able to, I think I would suggest to Vanessa, if we can have time for a commission discussion at some point on this. I know we have a letter and that whole process, but it seems like we need a chunk of time to kind of think through all of this.
Yeah, I would say the good news is that we do have time beyond just those 3 meetings, and the first of those 3rd meetings, which I just is the second meeting in February. So that will also give staff time to do the crosswalk that I mentioned between the proposal that we saw today and the proposal that we responded to, or the draft EIS that we responded to in February. And I would just remind commissioners that there were differing opinions on the commission when we discussed this earlier, and the tension of wanting to protect our industrial maritime lands, wanting to leverage the transit, wanting to be really careful about housing being allowed in industrial or adjacent to industrial areas while also leveraging transit. And there were, as I said, there were differing opinions on the commission. So I would anticipate, as we take this up as a discussion item again, those differing opinions might also, come to fore. So we will definitely ensure that we have adequate time as a commission to discuss and hear each other, for you all to hear each other, and to craft a letter of recommendation that expresses everybody's opinion while highlighting the consensus.
Yeah, I think the reason I was asking for that is that I'm like, we may need more time for this one than we have on other letters, which is why I'm like, we might need to build in time to have those discussions.
Definitely. So this work will go before the Land Use Committee of City Council, a minimum of 3 meetings and maybe even 4, with a vote potentially occurring in June. So we are not in situations where we have previously been in, where we really need to put together a letter in 3 meetings. We have a little bit more leeway on that for this particular issue.
Thanks,
Great,
Vanessa.
thank you.
Michaela, did you have another comment?
More of a question.
Okay.
Jim or Olivia, can one of you just flip to the slide that outlined a little bit of the changes in the urban industrial area that was shown on that map?
Good number of slides.
I'm looking.
Is it 18? No, I'm sorry.
Maybe, yes.
23? 23.
Sorry.
23, yeah, you're right, Matt. No.
You're saying urban, not industrial.
Are you perhaps thinking about the Stadium District slide?
Yeah, Stadium District slide. Changes in the stadium, 24. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted, this is the bit I feel like if I could absorb it more, maybe I'd have less of a concern. Hotels allowed. Lots of restaurants. So it just sounds to me like Pike Pine. This to me sounds so analogous to kind of the what's allowed in terms of heights and use in Pike Pine. And when you say workforce affordable, like what income level are you thinking of there?
We're
Above
talking about
80%?
up to 90% of AMI.
Okay. Oh, that's right there. Got it. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Michaela, Michaela and the rest of the commission, something else that John and I can work on specific to this slide is what is currently allowed in the Stadium District, because there is a Stadium Transition Area Overlay District, which is a mouthful. What is allowed, and then this proposal, so you can see where there are changes and where there are not significant changes.
That would help. Thank you.
Okay, I think that well, if there are any more questions, because we still have a little bit of time, or we can let Jim go and we can begin our crosswalk exercise.
Rick, I'll just say that the crosswalk exercise will require a little work for John and I to do. Okay.
I didn't mean to suggest that would be happening. I didn't mean that would be happening immediately.
Okay.
I meant that we could anticipate. That's what I should have said. Anticipate our crosswalk exercise. Okay, well, thank you, Jim.
My pleasure.
Thanks for giving us the update. Very much appreciate it.
Yep.
And Vanessa, as I understand it, we do not have public comment, either via email or in person.
That is correct.
So that would suggest that we could adjourn early. Okay, sorry, distracted by the chat. So I think that we could probably adjourn early. Yes?
We can.
Okay. Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
y'all.
Thank you.
Michaela, I'm going to write that tonight.